My name is Catherine Hayes. I'm 26 years old, and I've spent most of my life being invisible in my own family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The morning of Thanksgiving 2023 started like every other holiday in the Hayes household, with my mother calling me at 7 a.m, not to ask how I was doing, but to remind me what I needed to bring and what time I needed to arrive. No. Good morning, sweetheart. No, how have you been, Catherine? Just a list of demands delivered in that clipped, efficient tone she reserved especially for me. Catherine, you're bringing the rolls and the green bean casserole, she said without preamble. And please, for once, try to make them properly. Last year they were too salty. Your sister mentioned it several times. I sat up in bed, my husband Marcus stirring beside me. Good morning to you too, Mom, I said, keeping my voice even. The green beans were fine. Aunt Linda asked for the recipe. Well, Victoria thought they were too salty, and she has a very refined palate. She's been to France 3 times this year, you know. Anyway, be here by 2. And Catherine, please try to dress nicely. Victoria's in-laws will be here, and I want them to see that both my daughters are presentable. I looked down at Marcus, who was now fully awake and rolling his eyes. He'd heard these conversations before. In the 3 years we'd been married, he'd witnessed countless phone calls just like this one. I'll be there at 2, Mom, I said. And Catherine, maybe don't talk too much about your little job. Victoria's husband Thomas is a surgeon, and well, we don't want you to feel inadequate. Just smile and listen. That's always been your best quality. You're a very good listener. I ended the call and lay back down, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. Our bedroom. In the beautiful craftsman house that Marcus and I had bought 2 years ago. The house my mother had never asked to see. The house she didn't know existed because she'd never once inquired about where I lived or how I was doing. Let me guess, Marcus said, pulling me close. You're supposed to bring something, arrive on time, dress nicely, and preferably not speak because you might embarrass the family in front of Victoria's perfect in-laws. You know my mother so well, I replied, kissing his forehead. She also reminded me that Victoria has been to France 3 times this year, and that Thomas is a surgeon, in case I'd forgotten in the past week since she last told me. Marcus sat up, his dark eyes serious. Cat, we don't have to go. We could have our own Thanksgiving, just us. I'll make that turkey you love, we'll watch football, drink too much wine, and you won't have to spend the entire day being treated like you're somehow less than your sister. I considered it. God, how I considered it. But despite everything, despite the years of being overlooked and undervalued, despite being the daughter my mother only called when she needed something, I kept showing up. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the small, foolish part of me that still believed that one day my mother would actually see me. I have to go, I said finally. If I don't show up, it'll just be more ammunition. More proof that I'm the difficult daughter, the unreliable one. Victoria never misses family events. Victoria always brings the perfect dish. Victoria is everything I'm not. Victoria is a spoiled brat who's never had to work for anything in her life, Marcus said flatly. And her perfect marriage to the perfect surgeon? I give it 5 years, Max. Nobody's marriage is that flawless. I smiled despite myself. Marcus always knew how to make me feel better. You can't come with me, can you? I asked, already knowing the answer. I'm on call at the hospital, he said apologetically. Marcus was a trauma nurse, and holidays meant double shifts and emergencies. But I'll be thinking of you every minute. And Kat, remember who you are. Remember what you've accomplished. Don't let them make you feel small. I got up and started getting ready, my mind already preparing for the day ahead. As I showered, I thought about the last family gathering, Victoria's wedding 3 months ago. It had been a lavish affair at the city's most expensive hotel, with 300 guests, a designer dress that cost more than most people's cars, and enough flowers to stock a florist shop for a year. My mother had cried tears of joy during the ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief while whispering to anyone who would listen about how proud she was, how Victoria had found the perfect man, how this was everything she'd ever dreamed of for her daughter. I had been there, of course. I'd been a bridesmaid, wearing the unflattering dress Victoria had chosen specifically because, as she'd told me with a sweet smile, "I don't want anyone outshining me on my special day, and you know how you can be." I'd smiled through the ceremony, applauded at all the right moments, and given a toast that my mother had edited 3 times because it wasn't glowing enough. Not once during the entire wedding planning process, not once during the year-long engagement, had my mother asked me about my own life. Not once had she said, "Catherine, are you seeing anyone? Catherine, are you happy? Catherine, how's work going?" It was always Victoria this, Victoria that, Victoria's wedding, Victoria's dress, Victoria's photographer, Victoria's future. I pulled on a simple navy dress, nice enough to meet my mother's standards, but not so nice that it would draw attention. I'd learned that lesson years ago. The one time I'd worn something truly beautiful to a family event, Victoria had thrown such a fit that my mother had taken me aside and asked me to, "Please try not to overshadow your sister." I'd been 19 years old. By 1:30, I was in my car with 2 perfectly prepared dishes, driving toward my childhood home in the suburbs. The house looked exactly as it always had. A large colonial with a manicured lawn, a 2-car garage, and a front door adorned with an expensive wreath that my mother changed seasonally. This month's was a harvest theme, all orange and gold and perfectly arranged. I parked on the street, noticing that Victoria's BMW was already in the driveway, along with a Mercedes I didn't recognize, probably Thomas's parents' car. I sat in my Honda for a moment, giving myself a mental pep talk. You are successful. You are loved. You are enough. It was something my therapist had taught me to do, a small ritual to armor myself before entering the battlefield of my family's home. The door was unlocked, and I let myself in, immediately hit by the smell of turkey and the sound of laughter coming from the living room. I carried my dishes toward the kitchen, passing the living room where I could see Victoria holding court, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer dress probably costing more than my mortgage payment. And then the sommelier suggested this absolutely divine Bordeaux, she was saying, her voice carrying that affected tone she'd developed since marrying Thomas. Of course, Thomas immediately recognized it as a 2015 Chateau Margaux. He has such a sophisticated palate. "Catherine!" My mother's voice cut through the air as she appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked me up and down, her lips pursing slightly. "You're late. It's 2:05. "I'm 5 minutes late, Mom. Traffic was..." Victoria was here at 1:30. She brought the most beautiful centerpiece she made herself. Real flowers, not those cheap grocery store ones. Come meet Thomas's parents. I followed her into the living room, my dishes forgotten on the kitchen counter. The room fell silent as I entered, all eyes turning toward me. Victoria was perched on the sofa next to a tall, handsome man, who I assumed was Thomas. He looked exactly like what you'd expect. Polished, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Next to them sat an older couple who had to be his parents, both of them radiating the kind of old-money elegance that came from generations of wealth. "Everyone, this is my other daughter, Catherine," my mother said, and I didn't miss the emphasis on other, as if I were an afterthought. "Catherine, these are Dr. and Mrs. Whitmore, Thomas's parents." "It's lovely to meet you," I said, shaking their hands. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was polite, but distant, the kind of smile you give to service staff. "Catherine works in..." "What is it you do again, dear?" my mother asked, and I heard the familiar undercurrent in her voice. This was part of the game. She knew exactly what I did. She just wanted to diminish it in front of the Whitmores. "I'm the chief technology officer at a software company," I said evenly. "Oh, how nice," Mrs. Whitmore said in that tone wealthy women use when they're being polite about something they consider beneath them. "One of those tech startup things?" "Not exactly," I replied. "We're a cybersecurity firm. We work with major corporations and government agencies to protect their data infrastructure." "That sounds complicated," Victoria chimed in, laughing. "I could never understand all that computer stuff. I'm much more of a people person." That's why my work with the charity board is so fulfilling. We're planning a gala next month. You should come, Catherine, though I know your work probably keeps you so busy. The subtext was clear. I was too busy with my unglamorous job to be involved in the kind of meaningful, sophisticated work Victoria did. Never mind that Victoria's work consisted of attending luncheons and planning parties with her mother's friends while living off Thomas's surgeon salary. I'll check my calendar, I said neutrally, knowing I would do no such thing. My father appeared from his study, where he'd probably been hiding until forced to socialize. Catherine, good to see you, sweetheart. He hugged me, and I felt a rush of affection. My father had always been the gentler parent, though over the years he'd learned to simply go along with whatever my mother wanted. It was easier that way. Hi, Dad. How have you been? Oh, same old, same old. Retirement is treating me well. Your mother keeps me busy with projects around the house. He lowered his voice. She's very excited about today. Victoria's first Thanksgiving as a married woman. Of course she was. I forced a smile and moved to sit in the armchair farthest from the sofa where Victoria and Thomas were ensconced like royalty on their throne. For the next hour, I watched what I'd watched my entire life, the Victoria show. She talked about her honeymoon in Bali, describing in excruciating detail every resort they'd stayed at, every meal they'd eaten, every sunset they'd watched. She showed photos on her phone, passing it around like precious artifacts. She discussed her redecorating plans for the house she and Thomas had bought in the most expensive neighborhood in the city. A house, she mentioned several times, that her in-laws had helped them purchase. We're thinking of putting in a pool next summer, she said, snuggling against Thomas. Thomas loves to swim laps in the morning. He's so disciplined, up at 5 every morning for his workout routine. That's wonderful, dear, my mother cooed. Catherine, did you hear that? Thomas works out every morning. Discipline is so important. I bit my tongue. Marcus worked out every morning too, usually before his 12-hour shifts at the hospital. But my mother had never asked about Marcus, had never asked if I was seeing anyone, had never expressed even a passing interest in my personal life. Mom, Victoria said suddenly, her voice taking on a theatrical tone. Show everyone the video from my wedding, the highlight reel Thomas's parents had made. Oh, yes! My mother jumped up with an enthusiasm I'd rarely seen directed at anything involving me. She pulled out her iPad, and within moments, a professionally edited wedding video was playing on the large TV screen. Romantic music swelled as Victoria walked down the aisle in her designer gown, as she and Thomas exchanged vows, as they danced their first dance. I watched my mother's face as she watched the video. She was glowing with pride, her eyes misty with tears. This was what she'd always wanted. A daughter who married well, who looked perfect, who could be shown off to the country club friends and the church ladies. It was truly the wedding of the season, Mrs. Whitmore said when the video ended. Everyone was talking about it for weeks. Catherine was a bridesmaid, Victoria added, as if just remembering I existed. She looked so nice in her dress. Didn't she, Mother? Yes. The lilac was a good color on you, my mother said absently, already pulling up more photos on her iPad. Though you should have done something different with your hair. It was so flat. I took a deep breath, counted to 5, and smiled. I liked my hair. Of course you did, dear, my mother said in that patronizing tone. You've always been so practical. Not everyone has Victoria's sense of style. The doorbell rang, saving me from having to respond. More family members arrived, my Aunt Linda and Uncle George, my cousin Rebecca with her husband and 2 kids, my mother's sister, Patricia. The house filled with noise and the chaos of a large family gathering, and I slipped into my usual role, the invisible daughter. I helped in the kitchen, set the table, made sure everyone had drinks. No one really noticed me, which was exactly how it had always been. Dinner was announced at 4, and we all gathered around the enormous dining room table that my mother had decorated with her usual attention to detail. Victoria and Thomas sat on either side of my mother at one end, while I was relegated to the far end near the children's table. It was symbolic, and not subtle. As we started eating, the conversation naturally centered on Victoria and Thomas. My mother asked them about their house, their plans, their lives with an interest she'd never shown in mine. Thomas talked about his work at the hospital, about the surgeries he'd performed, about the lives he'd saved. He was good-looking and successful, and he knew it. There was an arrogance to him that made my skin crawl, but everyone else seemed charmed. "Thomas is being considered for chief of surgery," Victoria announced, squeezing his hand. "He's the youngest doctor they've ever considered for the position." "That's incredible, Thomas," my father said. "You must be very proud." "I've worked hard," Thomas said with false modesty. "It's always been my dream to reach the top of my field. Victoria understands the sacrifices it takes to be successful." I almost laughed. Sacrifices. Thomas had grown up with every advantage, attended the best schools on his parents' money, and had connections that opened every door. But sure, he'd made sacrifices. "Catherine," my Aunt Linda said suddenly, and I looked up, surprised to be addressed. "How's your work going? Last time we talked, you were working on some big project." "It's going well," I said. "We just finished—" "Catherine works with computers," my mother interrupted, as if I were a child with a hobby rather than a professional with a career. "It's all very technical. Thomas, tell us more about this chief of surgery position. When will you know?" And just like that, I was dismissed. Aunt Linda gave me an apologetic look, but the conversation moved on without me. I ate my perfectly cooked turkey and my green bean casserole that was not too salty, and I listened to my family fawn over Victoria and Thomas. It was during dessert that it happened. We were eating pumpkin pie, Victoria's pie, which my mother had praised extensively despite the fact that I knew for certain Victoria had bought it from the expensive bakery downtown. When my mother turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Catherine," she said, her voice carrying across the table, causing everyone to stop their conversations and look at us. Victoria's wedding was so beautiful. Really, it was perfect. Everything a mother could dream of for her daughter. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the air, that particular tension that preceded one of my mother's favorite games, publicly highlighting my failures by comparison to Victoria's successes. "When will yours be?" she asked, her smile sharpening. "You're 26 now. Most of your college friends must be married by now. Victoria was engaged at 23. She knew what she wanted and went after it. But I suppose everyone moves at their own pace. There's no rush, right? You have your little career to focus on." The table was silent. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how I would respond to this latest humiliation. Victoria was smirking into her wineglass. Thomas looked amused. My father looked uncomfortable but said nothing, as always. Aunt Linda's expression was sympathetic, but she too remained silent. This was it. This was the moment that had been building for years. All the slights, all the dismissals, all the times I'd been made to feel less than, invisible, not good enough. All the times I'd watched my mother pour her love and attention into Victoria while giving me nothing but criticism. All the times I'd been compared and found wanting. I put down my fork. I took a sip of water, and I looked my mother directly in the eyes. "Mine already happened," I said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. My mother's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, then something that might have been anger. "What?" she said finally. "My wedding," I replied, keeping my voice steady and matter of fact. "It already happened. 3 years ago, actually. I'm married, Mom. Have been for quite some time." The explosion was immediate. My mother's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Victoria dropped her wine glass, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Thomas looked shocked. My father's eyebrows had disappeared into his hairline. "That's impossible," my mother sputtered. "You're not married. You would have told us. You would have invited us. You're lying." "I'm not lying," I said calmly. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo. Me and Marcus on our wedding day, standing in front of a small chapel in Vermont, both of us smiling like we'd just won the lottery. I passed the phone to my father, who was sitting closest to me. He looked at the photo, his face softening. "Kat," he said quietly, "you look beautiful. So happy." I am, I replied. My mother snatched the phone from my father, staring at the photo as if it were a personal attack. "This is ridiculous. When did this happen? Who is this man? Why weren't we invited?" "His name is Marcus. He's a trauma nurse. We got married 3 years ago in Vermont. It was a small ceremony. Just us, the officiant, and 2 friends as witnesses." "You got married without your family?" Victoria's voice was shrill with disbelief. "What kind of person does that?" I turned to look at her, really look at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel smaller than my sister. I felt clear. I felt certain. "The kind of person whose family never asked if she was seeing anyone," I said. "The kind of person whose mother has called her exactly 12 times in 3 years, and 11 of those calls were to ask for favors. The kind of person who realized that if she announced her engagement, it would be turned into either a competition with her sister or completely dismissed as less important." "That's not fair," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I asked. "Mom, when was the last time you asked me how I was doing? When was the last time you asked about my life, my job, my happiness? When was the last time you called me just to talk, not to criticize or compare me to Victoria?" The silence was damning. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I'll tell you when," I continued, and I was surprised by how calm I felt. Years of therapy had prepared me for this moment, though I hadn't known it. "Never. You've never done any of those things." "Do you know what I do for a living, Mom? Really know?" "You work with computers," she said defensively. "I'm the chief technology officer of a cybersecurity company," I said clearly. "I oversee a team of 45 people. I've testified before Congress twice about data protection laws. I've been featured in Forbes and TechCrunch. Last year, our company was valued at $200 million. I make more in a year than most people make in a decade. But you've never asked. You've never been interested. Because it wasn't something you could brag about at the country club the way you brag about Victoria's marriage to a surgeon." Mrs. Whitmore made a small sound, and I realized that while my mother hadn't been impressed by my career, the Whitmores certainly were. They were looking at me differently now, with something like respect. "Catherine," my father said, his voice thick with emotion, "why didn't you tell us?" "I tried, Dad," I said, and I felt tears pricking at my eyes for the first time. So many times. But every conversation was about Victoria, Victoria's engagement, Victoria's wedding planning, Victoria's house. There was never space for me. And I realized that if I told you I was getting married, Mom would either try to compete with Victoria's wedding, or she'd dismiss it as less important. So Marcus and I decided to just do it. For us. Because our marriage wasn't about impressing anyone or having the biggest party, or getting the approval of people who'd never really seen me anyway. "That's cruel," Victoria said. But there was something in her voice that wasn't quite right. Something brittle. "Is it?" I asked. "Victoria, I was happy for you when you got engaged. I was happy for you when you got married. I showed up to every dress fitting, every tasting, every planning session. I gave you a bridal shower and a bachelorette party. I stood up at your wedding in that ugly dress you chose specifically to make sure I wouldn't look good. I gave a toast that Mom edited 3 times. I was there for you. Were you ever there for me?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because we both knew the truth. "Catherine," my mother said, and her voice was shaking now. "If you're really married, where is this husband of yours? Why didn't you bring him today?" "He's working," I said. "He's a trauma nurse at County General. He's on call today because someone needs to take care of the people who get hurt on holidays. He's been working there for 5 years. He volunteers at a free clinic on weekends. He's kind and smart, and he loves me for who I am, not for who he thinks I should be. And he asked me to marry him knowing I might never be accepted by my family. And he told me he didn't care because I was worth it." I pulled out my phone again and pulled up more photos. "Here's our house. We bought it 2 years ago. It's a Craftsman in the Riverside neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, original hardwood floors. We renovated it ourselves. Here's our living room. Here's the garden I planted. Here's Marcus with his nieces. Here's us at the Grand Canyon last summer. Here's our Christmas card from last year. The one I never sent to you because I knew you wouldn't care. I passed my phone around the table, and I watched as my family looked at evidence of a life I'd been living completely outside their awareness. A happy life. A full life. A life that had nothing to do with their approval or their attention. My father was crying. Actual tears running down his face. "Kat," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't pay attention. I'm so sorry I let this happen." "Dad," I said gently, "you let Mom steamroll you the way she's always done. You're not the villain here, but you're not innocent either. You stood by while she made it clear that Victoria was the daughter who mattered, and I was just the other one. This is absurd," my mother said, but her voice was weaker now. "You're being dramatic. I've always treated you girls equally." "No, you haven't," Aunt Linda said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her. She looked at my mother with an expression I'd never seen before, anger mixed with disappointment. "Sarah, I've watched you do this for 26 years. You've favored Victoria since the day she was born. Catherine could have cured cancer, and you would have found a way to make it about how Victoria volunteers at a hospital fundraiser. It's been painful to watch." "Linda, stay out of this," my mother snapped. "No," Aunt Linda said firmly. "I've stayed out of it for too long. We all have. We've all watched you ignore Catherine, criticize her, dismiss her accomplishments while putting Victoria on a pedestal. And for what? Because Victoria fits your image of what a daughter should be? Because she married the right kind of man and has the right kind of life? Victoria is exceptional," my mother said defensively. "Victoria is spoiled," Aunt Linda replied bluntly. "And before you lose your mind, Victoria, I love you. But your mother has done you no favors by making you think you're the center of the universe. Catherine built a life for herself, despite having no support from this family. She should be celebrated, not interrogated because she didn't include you in a wedding you would have made all about yourselves anyway." The room erupted then, everyone talking at once. My mother was defending herself. Victoria was crying. Thomas looked deeply uncomfortable, and several relatives were taking sides. My father just sat there, looking older than I'd ever seen him, tears still running down his face. "Stop," I said, not loudly, but firmly enough that everyone went quiet. "Just stop. I didn't tell you this to start a fight or to hurt anyone. I told you because I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of sitting at this table feeling invisible. I'm tired of being treated like my life doesn't matter because I didn't do things the way Mom wanted me to." I stood up, pushing back my chair. "I have a good life. I have a husband who loves me. I have a career I'm proud of. I have friends who see me and value me. I have everything I need, and I did it all without your approval. And the truth is, I'm happier than I've ever been, because I stopped waiting for you to notice me." "Where are you going?" my mother asked, and for the first time she sounded uncertain. "Home," I said simply. "To my husband, to my house, to my life. The one I built while you were busy obsessing over Victoria's." "Catherine, please," my father said, standing up. "Don't leave like this. Let's talk about this. Dad, we can talk. You have my number. You've always had my number. Call me. Come visit. Meet Marcus. See my house. Be part of my life. But that's your choice to make. I'm done begging for crumbs of attention from people who've made it clear I don't matter as much as Victoria does." I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear my mother starting to cry, Victoria yelling something about how I'd ruined Thanksgiving, and various relatives arguing about what had just happened. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I got in my car, and I drove away from that house. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Marcus was home when I got there, having gotten off work earlier than expected. He took one look at my face and wrapped me in his arms. "How bad?" he asked. "I told them," I said, and I started to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of someone who's been hurt, but the genuine laugh of someone who's finally, finally released a weight they'd been carrying for too long. I told them everything. Good, he said, kissing my forehead. I'm proud of you. What happened? I told him the whole story while we sat on our couch in our house, drinking the expensive wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. Because this was special. This was the day I stopped letting my mother's opinion define my worth. Do you think they'll reach out? Marcus asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe Dad will. I hope he does. I'd like him to meet you, to see this life we've built. But Mom, I don't know if she's capable of admitting she was wrong. And Victoria has been enabled for so long. I'm not sure she even understands what happened today. And if they don't, Marcus asked gently, then we keep living our lives, I said. We keep being happy. We keep building our future. We don't need their validation, remember? No, he agreed, pulling me closer. We don't. But someone did reach out that evening. My phone rang around 8, and it was Aunt Linda. Catherine, she said, her voice warm. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. What you did today took courage, and I'm sorry that none of us stood up for you sooner. Aunt Linda, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. I've been complicit in your mother's favoritism by staying silent. We all have. But that changes now. I'd love to meet Marcus, and I want to see this house you've built. Would you two be free for lunch next week? I felt tears building again. But these were different tears. We'd love that. Good. And Catherine, your father is devastated. He's been sitting in his study for hours. He wants to call you, but he's afraid you won't pick up. Tell him to call me, I said. I'll pick up. I'm not angry at Dad. I just needed him to understand what's been happening. What's always been happening. I will, Aunt Linda promised. And honey, that husband of yours must be pretty special. The way you talked about him, the way your face lit up in those photos. That's real love. That's what matters. After we hung up, I showed Marcus the photos I'd shown my family, our life in pictures. Us painting the house, planting the garden, celebrating our first, second, and third anniversaries. Us at concerts and museums and hiking trails. Us being normal, happy, in love. We have a good life, I said. We have a great life, Marcus corrected. And it's just getting started. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from my father. Can I call you tomorrow? I need to talk to you. I need to apologize properly. I need to meet Marcus. I need to be a better father. Please give me a chance. I texted back, call me tomorrow. I'd like that. Another text came through. This one from a number I didn't recognize at first, then realized was my cousin Rebecca. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. You're my hero. Let's get coffee soon. Then another from my Uncle George. Your mother needs to hear hard truths. Proud of you, kiddo. My phone kept buzzing with messages from relatives I'd barely spoken to in years, all of them saying variations of the same thing. They'd noticed. They'd seen how I was treated. They were sorry they hadn't said anything. They wanted to be part of my life. But notably, there was nothing from my mother. Nothing from Victoria. Marcus saw me checking my phone. Waiting to hear from them? He asked. No, I said, and I meant it. I'm not waiting anymore. If they want to reach out, they know where to find me. But I'm not going to sit around hoping they'll finally see me as worthy of their attention. I'm done with that. Good, Marcus said. He pulled out his own phone and showed me a photo. Speaking of attention, I think there's something you should see. It was a screenshot from Facebook. Victoria had posted a long, rambling status about how I had ruined Thanksgiving with my drama, and how I was jealous of her perfect life. Several of her friends had liked it and commented supportive messages. But underneath, there were other comments from family members who'd been at dinner. Aunt Linda had written, "The only drama was 26 years in the making, and it wasn't Catherine's fault." Uncle George had written, "Maybe spend less time worrying about your perfect image and more time being a better sister." Even my cousin Rebecca had commented, "Catherine has more class and grace than this entire post shows. Grow up, Victoria. She's trying to control the narrative," I said. "And it's not working," Marcus pointed out. People were there. They saw what happened. They know the truth. He was right. The truth was out now, and there was no putting it back in the box. My family knew I was married. They knew I had a successful career. They knew I'd built a life without their knowledge or input. And most importantly, they knew why. Over the next few days, more family members reached out. Some were apologetic, others were simply curious, but all of them seemed to want to connect in a way they never had before. It was as if by finally standing up for myself, I'd given them permission to see me as a real person, rather than just Victoria's sister. My father called as promised, and we talked for 2 hours. He cried, apologized, and promised to do better. We made plans for him to come visit, to meet Marcus, to see our house. He sounded genuine, and I wanted to believe him. "Your mother is struggling," he said carefully. "She's not handling this well." "That's not my problem to fix, Dad," I replied. "I'm not responsible for managing her emotions. I'm responsible for my own happiness and well-being." "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I want our family to be whole." "It can be," I said. "But that requires Mom to acknowledge what she's done, to actually see me and value me, to stop comparing me to Victoria and finding me wanting. And I don't know if she's capable of that." "I'll talk to her," he promised. "Don't do it for me," I said. "Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because you've been complicit in this for 26 years, and it's time to change. Do it because you have 2 daughters who both deserve your attention and love, not just the one who fits Mom's ideal." The conversation ended with plans to have dinner the following week. Just me, Marcus, and my father. It felt like a start. But it was Victoria who surprised me most. 5 days after Thanksgiving, she showed up at my house. I saw her BMW pull up through the living room window, and my first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home. But Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. "Talk to her," he said. "You'll always wonder if you don't." So I opened the door before she could knock. Victoria stood on my porch, looking smaller somehow without our mother's presence bolstering her. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked into our house, looking around with obvious surprise. It was a beautiful house, decorated with care and filled with evidence of the life Marcus and I had built. Photos on the walls, books on the shelves, Marcus's nursing textbooks stacked on the coffee table next to my laptop. "You have a nice place," Victoria said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Thank you," I replied. Marcus and I worked hard on it. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I didn't know," she said. "About the wedding. About Marcus. About any of it." "I know you didn't," I said. "Because you never asked. None of you did." "That's not fair," she started, then stopped herself. "Actually, maybe it is. I've been thinking about what you said at Thanksgiving, about how I was never there for you. And you're right. I wasn't. I was so wrapped up in my own life, so used to Mom making everything about me, that I never stopped to think about you." "Victoria, let me finish," she interrupted. "Please. I need to say this. Growing up, I always knew I was Mom's favorite. I knew she treated you differently, but I told myself it didn't matter, because you seemed fine. You were smart and capable, and you didn't need the same attention I did. That's what I told myself anyway. But the truth is, I liked being the favorite. I liked being the center of attention, and I never thought about what that meant for you. I didn't say anything. I dreamed of this moment, of Victoria acknowledging the dynamic that had defined our childhood. But now that it was happening, I didn't know how to respond. "The thing is," Victoria continued, her voice cracking, "my life isn't as perfect as it looks. Thomas, he's not who I thought he was. The house, the lifestyle, the image, it's all real, but it's not happy. He's having an affair with one of the surgical residents. I found out 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I felt a surge of sympathy despite everything. Victoria, I'm sorry. Don't be," she said bitterly. "I married him because he fit the image. Because Mom was so proud. Because everyone was impressed. I didn't marry him because I loved him. I'm not even sure I know what love looks like. Real love, I mean. The kind you and Marcus clearly have. You saw us together for all of 5 seconds at Thanksgiving, I pointed out. I saw your face when you talked about him, Victoria replied. I saw those photos. I saw the way you smiled when you described your life with him. I've never smiled like that about Thomas, not once. Our entire relationship has been about appearances and status. And now I'm 29 years old, married to a man who's cheating on me, living in a house that doesn't feel like home, and I'm realizing that maybe being Mom's favorite wasn't the prize I thought it was. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Victoria looked at me directly. I was horrible to you at my wedding, she said. Making you wear that ugly dress because I didn't want you to look pretty. Making you give that toast that Mom edited. Treating you like you were just there to serve me. I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry. Thank you, I said quietly. That means something. Are you happy? Victoria asked. Really happy? Yes, I said without hesitation. Marcus and we're partners. He sees me. He values me. We built this life together, and it's not about impressing anyone or having the biggest house or the most prestigious careers. It's about coming home to someone who makes you laugh, who supports your dreams, who loves you on your worst days. That sounds nice, Victoria said wistfully. Really nice. It is, I replied. Then, despite everything, I asked, what are you going to do? About Thomas? I don't know yet, she admitted. Probably get a divorce. Mom will be devastated. Her perfect daughter's perfect marriage falling apart. But I can't keep pretending. Not after seeing what real happiness looks like. She stood up to leave, and I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned to me one more time. Can we try? She asked. To have a real relationship? I know I don't deserve it after how I've treated you, but I'd like to try. To be actual sisters instead of whatever we've been. I thought about it. About all the years of being second best, of being dismissed, of watching Victoria be celebrated while I was ignored, about how easy it would be to say no, to cut her out completely, to let her feel what it's like to be on the outside. But I also thought about what Marcus had told me once. Healing isn't about making other people suffer the way they made you suffer. It's about choosing to be better than the pain that was inflicted on you. We can try, I said. But it has to be real, Victoria. You have to actually want to know me, not just feel guilty about how things were. I do, she said. I really do. After she left, I told Marcus about the conversation. He listened quietly, then said, That must have been hard to hear. About Thomas. It was, I agreed. But also, I'm not surprised. There was always something off about him. Something performative. Not like us. Marcus said with a smile, pulling me into his arms. We're the real deal. The realest. I agreed. My father visited the following week, and meeting Marcus was like watching 2 pieces of a puzzle click into place. They talked about sports and medicine and home renovation, and I could see my father's respect for Marcus growing with every minute. When we gave him a tour of the house, my father kept stopping to look at details, the built-in bookshelves Marcus had installed, the garden I'd planted, the photos on our walls documenting our life together. Kat, he said when we were back in the living room, this is wonderful. All of this. You've built something really special here. Loris, we have, I said, taking Marcus's hand. Together. I'm sorry I missed it, my father said, his eyes getting misty again. I'm sorry I missed your wedding. I'm sorry I didn't meet Marcus 3 years ago. I'm sorry I let your mother dictate who got attention in our family. I'm sorry for all of it. I know, Dad, I said, and I appreciate that. But what matters now is what happens going forward. I want to be part of your life, he said firmly. Really part of it. Not just showing up for holidays, but actually being your father. Getting to know Marcus. Being here for you both. We'd like that, I said, and I meant it. We had dinner together, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my father was actually seeing me. Not as the disappointing daughter, or the one who didn't measure up to Victoria, but as Catherine, as me, as someone worthy of his time and attention. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a long message from my mother. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of an explanation, a justification, a series of reasons why she'd acted the way she had. She talked about her own mother favoring her brother, about how she'd always been a disappointment to her parents, about how when Victoria was born, she'd seen a chance to give a daughter everything she never had. She talked about how she'd been overwhelmed when I came along 2 years later, how she'd seen me as self-sufficient in a way Victoria wasn't, how she'd thought I didn't need her attention the way Victoria did. It was a lot of words that essentially boiled down to, "I know I treated you badly, but it wasn't really my fault." I showed the message to Marcus. He read it, then looked at me seriously. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me wants to write back and point out all the ways this message is just more of the same, making excuses instead of taking responsibility. But another part of me wonders if this is the best she can do, and if I should accept it for what it is. "There's no right answer," Marcus said. "You get to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with her going forward. Whatever you choose, I support you." In the end, I wrote back, "Mom, I appreciate you reaching out. But explanations aren't the same as apologies, and understanding why something happened doesn't excuse the harm it caused. I'm willing to work toward rebuilding our relationship, but that requires you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong, not just explain why you did it. When you're ready to do that, we can talk." I never got a response to that message. Not that day, not that week, not that month. And slowly, I realized I was okay with that. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn my mother's approval, trying to be enough for her. But I was enough. I'd always been enough. I just needed to see it for myself. The holidays came and went. Marcus and I spent Christmas with his family, who welcomed me with open arms the way they had since the first time Marcus brought me home. We spent New Year's with friends, toasting to new beginnings and honest conversations. And through it all, I felt lighter than I had in years. Victoria and I started having coffee once a month. She filed for divorce from Thomas, which sent shockwaves through my mother's social circle, but which Victoria handled with more grace than I'd expected. She started therapy, started questioning the values she'd been raised with, started figuring out who she was beyond being my mother's golden child. It wasn't always easy. She slipped into old patterns sometimes, talking about herself without asking about me, making comparisons that stung. But she was trying, genuinely trying, and I appreciated that. My father became a regular presence in our lives. He came for dinner every other week, helped Marcus with projects around the house, and slowly started standing up to my mother when she made disparaging comments about me. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was progress. And my mother? She stayed away. Sometimes I'd hear from my father that she was angry about my betrayal, about how I'd humiliated her in front of Thomas's parents, about how I'd ruined Thanksgiving. Other times I'd hear she was sad, confused about where she went wrong, wanting to reach out, but not knowing how. But she never actually reached out, never made the choice to put aside her pride and have an honest conversation. I grieved that, in a way. Grieved the mother-daughter relationship I'd always wanted but would never have. But I also recognized that I couldn't force someone to change who didn't want to change. All I could do was control my own actions, my own boundaries, my own life. 6 months after that Thanksgiving, Marcus and I decided to renew our vows. Not because our marriage needed renewing, but because we wanted to celebrate it properly. We wanted to have a ceremony with the people who actually cared about us, who'd supported us, who saw us and valued us. We planned something small and beautiful at a botanical garden. My father walked me down the aisle. Aunt Linda was there with Uncle George and Rebecca. Marcus's entire family came. Several of our friends. Even Victoria came, and she cried happy tears when Marcus and I exchanged the vows we'd written for each other. My mother wasn't there. She'd been invited, but she never responded to the invitation. And while I'd once thought that would devastate me, I found that it didn't. Because as I stood there in my simple white dress, holding hands with the man who loved me completely, surrounded by people who celebrated us, I realized something profound. I didn't need my mother's approval to have a beautiful life. I didn't need her validation to know my worth. I'd found family in the people who chose to show up for me, and that was enough. At the reception, my father stood up to make a toast. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. 3 years ago, my daughter got married and I wasn't there, he said. I'll regret that for the rest of my life, but today I get a second chance. Catherine, you are extraordinary. You're smart and capable and kind, and you've built a life that anyone would be lucky to be part of. Marcus, thank you for seeing in my daughter what I should have seen all along. Thank you for loving her the way she deserves to be loved. And Catherine, honey, I'm so proud of you. Not because of your career or your house or any of the external things. I'm proud of you because you had the courage to demand better. Because you refused to settle for being invisible. Because you built a life on your own terms. That takes strength I'm not sure I have. He raised his glass. To Catherine and Marcus. To love that sees you. To family that chooses you. To second chances and new beginnings. Everyone drank to that, and I felt tears running down my face. Good tears, happy tears, tears of relief and joy and closure. Later, as Marcus and I danced our first dance, he whispered in my ear, "No regrets?" "About what?" I asked. "Not having the big wedding, not having your whole family here, missing out on all the traditional stuff." I looked around at the people celebrating with us, the people who'd shown up, who'd always shown up, who'd chosen to be part of our lives. Then I looked at my husband, this incredible man who'd loved me when I didn't think I was worthy of love, who'd married me knowing my family might never accept him, who'd built a life with me brick by brick and moment by moment. "No regrets," I said firmly. "This is perfect. We're perfect. Everything is exactly as it should be." And I meant it. Because the truth I'd learned over the past 6 months was this: you can't force people to see your worth. You can't make people value you if they're determined not to. But you can choose to value yourself. You can choose to build a life with people who celebrate you rather than diminish you. You can choose to walk away from tables where you're not being served. That Thanksgiving, when my mother had asked when my wedding would be, she'd expected to make me feel small. She'd expected me to shrink under the weight of comparison to Victoria, to apologize for not living up to her expectations, to accept my place as the lesser daughter. Instead, I'd told the truth, a simple truth that had been waiting 3 years to be spoken. And that truth had changed everything. Not because it changed my mother. It hadn't. Not because it fixed my family. It hadn't done that either. But because it freed me from the endless cycle of seeking approval from someone who would never give it. It freed me to embrace the life I'd already built, the love I'd already found, the person I'd already become. In the months and years that followed, I stopped waiting for my mother to see me. I stopped hoping that one day she'd wake up and realize what she'd missed. I stopped giving her power over my happiness and my sense of self-worth. I built my career. Marcus and I bought a second property as an investment. We traveled to places we'd always dreamed of visiting. We hosted dinners for friends who became our chosen family. We supported each other through challenges and celebrated each other's victories. We built a life that was rich and full and meaningful, completely independent of my mother's approval. Victoria and I developed a real relationship, one built on honesty rather than competition. She eventually met someone new, a high school teacher who made her laugh and didn't care about country club status or social climbing. My mother hated him, which Victoria took as a good sign. She was learning, slowly, to trust her own judgment over our mother's expectations. My father continued to be part of our lives, and while he never fully extracted himself from my mother's influence, he made an effort to maintain separate relationships with both his daughters. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And my mother? She stayed in her bubble of denial and resentment, unable to admit fault or change behavior. Sometimes I felt sad about that. Sometimes I felt angry, but mostly, I felt free. Free from the burden of her expectations. Free from the weight of constantly falling short. Free to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. Years later, when people asked me about my family, I told the truth. My relationship with my mother is complicated, but I have an amazing husband, a growing relationship with my sister, a good relationship with my father, and incredible friends who are my chosen family. I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. And that was the greatest revenge, if you could even call it that. Not making my mother suffer. Not proving her wrong through grand gestures or public confrontations. Just living well. Just being happy. Just building a life so full and rich that her opinion stopped mattering. That Thanksgiving dinner, when I'd calmly said, "Mine already happened," I'd unleashed a truth that had been buried for 3 years. But I'd also unleashed myself from a prison of other people's expectations. I'd given myself permission to stop performing for an audience that would never applaud. I'd chosen myself. And that choice, that single moment of honest revelation, changed everything. This story teaches us that your worth is not determined by whether others choose to see it. Sometimes the most powerful act is to stop seeking validation from those who refuse to give it, and instead build a life surrounded by people who truly value you. When family dynamics consistently leave you feeling invisible or inadequate, protecting your peace and happiness isn't selfish. It's necessary. Have you ever been in a situation similar to this title where you had to reveal a truth that exposed long-standing family dynamics? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe in choosing yourself and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate you rather than diminish you, give it a like and subscribe for more stories like this. Let me know where you're watching from.